Hello from Zürich, Switzerland, and welcome to Eclectic Spacewalk Conversations. I'm your host, Nicholas McKay. Today we're joined by Patricia Hurducaș. Patricia is the creator of the Flâneuse Project, an online repository for interviews, essays, and a digital gallery. She is also a curator and an Interintellect Salon host. Welcome to Conversations, Patricia.
Thank you so much, Nicholas.
So first off, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Satu Mare in Romania. It's a city near Ukraine and Hungary, and it's a small city. After that, I lived in Cluj, in Berlin, and now I live in Switzerland.
Okay, and then so let's go back a little bit to early Patricia. So what did she want to be when she grew up? Like, what was her really influences?
I think I always wanted to be a writer. I mean, since I was a kid, 5-6 years old, since I started writing actually, I would just imagine different worlds and I would just write down different characters, different chapters in a book. I would never finish the books, so yeah, I think that was my biggest dream.
Lots of upstarts. So what did you really try to emulate any writers? Like, what was your favorite author or book that you can kind of first comes to mind?
J.K. Rowling.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So Harry Potter was a big influence.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, me too. I would say that. So what, other than say like some authors, then who were like kind of people in your life that maybe influenced your curiosity? Was it like a cool uncle or your parents or friends, family, stuff like that?
I think most of my influences were from books, so from characters and the books that I read. And I could also say that my dad was an inspiration because he was always very motivated to do things, to finish projects, to provide for the family.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I have him as a role model. But most of my influences come from fiction, I think, from the books I read, from the characters that I wanted to be.
So Harry Potter, check. But then, like, did you get into other things like fantasy or sci-fi? Like, what were your kind of the genres that you were really pulled towards?
I think I liked more sci-fi.
Okay.
Yeah, because I felt this pull towards different worlds, especially time travel. And I actually started a book on time travel. It's called Travel to Edinburgh. It's just an experiment because I like to think about time travel quite a lot.
Okay.
The possibility of different worlds, different timelines, going back in time, going towards the future. So yeah.
Okay, so like, give us some timelines. Like, I mean, I just read Dune for the first time, before the movie came out. I'm reading the Foundation series, So,
yeah.
or what are some other, like, I guess, name off some authors or books that really like pulled to you? Like,
I really like the book The Time Machine. So it's a book,
classic.
I think, yes, it's a classic. I think that influenced me a lot. But other than that, I think Ursula Le Guin, she also influenced me quite a lot in how I wrote. But other than that, I think it's just a curiosity to know if time travel is possible, and how we can do that as humankind. Or if it's just fiction, or if it's just fantasy after all.
Right. Yeah, Ursula K. Le Guin is actually one of my favorite authors. We loved the Tales of the Earthsea, books, series. But then also I just picked up Lathe of Heaven, I think, or Second Hand of Darkness. I can't remember, but I picked them up when they were in the apartment. I still have to read them, but yeah, she was a big author for me as well. But so time travel, that's a very interesting and specific subject. Like, if you had one time travel to go in the past and then maybe in the future, because everyone wants to go in the future, but would you go like 500 years in the future or 10,000 years in the future, or is there a specific time also in the past that you would love to be in or love to experience?
I think I would love to go into the past, so not into the future. I think I would like to go into the La Belle Époque period of time, so before the World War I.
Okay.
I would love to explore that, especially in Europe, with all the the beautiful castles and the world of abundance that existed before. Of course, not for everybody, but
sure.
It's something that it's quite intriguing to see. So
is that like decadent culture and like high culture,
exactly.
Like a lot of literature, etc.?
Salons, okay. Literature.
Okay.
You know, meeting new, interesting people.
Okay.
Basically, what we're doing now, but in a more decadent way, I guess.
That's interesting, yeah, because like coffee shops back in the day, like that kind of like intellectual curiosity between people, etc. That's an interesting time period. Is there like a specific city or just more Europe in general?
I think Europe in general, even though I'm thinking about London in particular, okay. About Paris, Vienna as well.
Vienna, yeah, the Vienna Circle and
exactly.
Everything like that. Okay.
So the literary salons, the cities of the literary salons.
Right. Yeah, and that's obviously still a huge part of our culture nowadays. Even like we go back to those kind of writers, thinkers, etc. So I guess then this is a good time. We can talk about salons and curation series in a minute, but let's go back. So take us through your academic journey. You were very interested in, I'm assuming, literature, English, you know, and then, you know, you went to school. Take us through that kind of journey. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, so I studied at the Faculty of Letters in Cluj. I studied German literature, okay. And also English and French literature. And after that, I moved to Berlin for a master's degree. There I studied more German literature and also English and American literature. And I wrote my dissertation on the Flâneuse, on the modern and postmodern Flâneuse. And after that, I kind of went away from the academic world and I started working in corporate. So okay. It was a major shift, and that happened 4 years ago. And now I'm going back to the academic world and to actually creating, writing. So I had my fair time in the corporate world, but now I want to change. Well, actually to go back to those times where things were a bit more bohemian in a way.
Okay, that's a good word. Yeah, for sure. So let's unpack a little bit. So when you were in school and university, you said German literature, English literature, and French literature. Was there maybe one author or a bunch of authors that you kind of pulled to more than others?
I think in relation to German literature, I loved Hermann Hesse.
Okay.
With the Steppenwolf. Maybe sure. You heard about that book. So I think that was my pull. But we mostly studied, writers from the Sturm und Drang period of time in Germany, like Goethe, for example. So it was more like traditional kind of authors. As for the American literature, I was really pulled towards postmodern, or actually modern authors like Lauren Elkin, who also wrote a book about the Flâneuse. So she was my inspiration also to write my dissertation on that.
Okay. And then Hermann Hesse, I'm pretty sure, did he write Siddhartha as well?
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
So that's what I thought. As soon as you said him, I was like, I loved that book because that was a big, I'm not very spiritual anymore. I grew up Southern Baptist in Tennessee. But now it's like I'm more along the lines of, finding out for what it is for you, a person. And I think Siddhartha, even though it's very Buddhist kind of imagery and that kind of thing, the main lesson at the end of the riverboat guy that's going across the river and you just finding out your own path, etc., was very illuminating to me. So it's interesting that So Steppenwolf, Hermann Hesse, Flâneuse is in there. Okay, so then why did you kind of hone in on that for your dissertation? Like what kind of drew you to like the Flâneuse kind of idea, I guess you could say?
I think it was more or less a personal hobby of mine. So I found a lot of freedom in just, walking and exploring new cities. And I wanted to see how women walked and explored new cities 100 years ago and also now, and how they wrote about that in their books. What kind of goals they had, what kind of motivations they had behind all that exploration and walking. So I think that was my main motivation. And I also love the topic. I really loved exploring it, from Walter Benjamin's archives to her own, so Lauren Elkin's personal discovery of walking in Paris, in Tokyo, in London, in the US, and how she compared, for example, the walkability in cities in the US versus the walkability in cities in Europe, how much freedom she had. So I think that was my main motivation.
Okay. So let's maybe we got ahead of ourselves. So can you just explain like what a flâneur is or a flâneuse, just so we can kind of catch the audience up?
It's a person that walks aimlessly in a city. So without a purpose, only to discover the city, only to enjoy it, for the exploration's sake. To give you some context, Walter Benjamin wrote in the archives, in the Arcades project, a lot about the flâneur, and also how it came into existence, for example, in the 19th century Paris, and how people would just walk near the shops and just enjoy the city, and then there was this shift towards a more consumerist world, and all this walking only for the exploration's sake shifted towards consumerism, and you walk to shop, so you always had a goal to do something in the city, in comparison to how it was maybe before, when you would just go and for the pure aesthetic pleasure of seeing a city.
And that would be any time, because that would be, say, like for lunch, or would that be like weekend walks? And I'm trying to like hone down, was this like maybe one person, or was this more of like it just kind of happened and emerged, and then someone put a definition on it saying that's what a flâneur does, to walk aimlessly? And because you said Paris was one of the places that kind of it
yes, Paris and also London. I think also Poe wrote in The Man of the Crowd about the flâneur, so it's a short story. Okay. I don't know, this phenomenon is very interesting, because before, I think in the 18th, 19th century, a flâneur was usually a man, and a man of means. So a rich man who would have the time to be idle. Right. Because workers would not have, the time. But that doesn't mean that they were not also flâneurs. They would not also, find, pleasure and enjoyment in just enjoying a city and walking around.
Can you be a flâneur in the countryside?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, making sure.
I think even though I see the flâneur as more like a cosmopolitan figure, because in a city you have, the hustle and the bustle of a city, and you have a lot of novelty, and you see a lot of people, and you can actually disappear in a crowd.
Sure.
And that's also, I think, a trait of the flâneur, the fact that you're just disappearing into the crowd, and you're one of the crowd.
That's interesting. And so nowadays it seems like you can, I've always gotten the best advice from people that have traveled a lot to then like almost get lost, and it seems like that's kind of along the way of a flâneur, is that like it's okay to not have a specific point A to point B. It's okay and you can really experience the city. I mean, I've almost tried to do that in my travels in the last couple of years now, and it seems like a very fruitful thing, because then you go into different shops, or go into a corner that you didn't think you would before, or something. So like, what are some of the not just aesthetic but maybe personal things that a person gets from that? Like, is it fulfillment? Is it just adventure? Is it those kind of things?
I think it's the pleasure of novelty. Okay. Because you can always see a city with fresh new eyes. I mean, even now, after living 2 years in Switzerland, I think I visited Zürich many times. I can still, find novelty and see something that I haven't seen before. Even a bookstore or a cafe or, a sign. I think it's really about the relationship you can have with a city, in the sense that a city is more than, just a place for, consumption and entertainment. You can also discover it from many points of view, from a historical perspective, trying to understand the culture, the people. I'm also very interested in the design of cities, and that's also in relation to the flâneur. I mean, some cities have this beautiful walkability, as in Zürich. You also told me that when you arrive here, what a beautiful city it is, and that changed your mood, I think, and also how you perceive the city, and also how you walked in the city. So I think this is also something, I think that's why I'm so attracted to the flâneur concept, because this also means that we can explore places for thinking and for walking and make them more beautiful for somebody to enjoy, to discover, to be inspired, for the right things or for a conversation, in building the atmosphere, of a conversation or simply just making your day a bit more beautiful.
Right. So the design of cities is very paramount in this. Okay. So I want to kind of go back to, like you said, something you pointed out of, historically it was a lot of men of well-means. So was there like women, like how did women get into, like how did the Flâneuse come about? Was there one woman who loved to do it, or was it more of an emergence, again, a phenomenon that like just so happened that women were now doing the same thing that men were doing?
I think women were always flâneurs, but they were seen through the male gaze, to the male perspective. Mm-hmm. For example, Charles Baudelaire, a French poet, wrote a poem. I think it's called Une passante, so a passerby, but the female passerby. And the way he describes her in that poem is like more or less like a prostitute or a woman of the night. Because women around the time, if you go at that hour or, without a male companion, you would have been perceived as a prostitute, but maybe she was only a flâneuse. So that's actually how I also started my dissertation, with that kind of, perspective that the flâneuse also existed, not only the flâneur, because everybody can walk, everybody can enjoy a city, sure. and find pleasure. Of course, if you are a worker versus a wealthy person, that would not allow you to have that kind of luxury all the time, but that doesn't mean that you are not also a flâneur. So I think it was about the perspective in that sense, because women were flâneurs, but it's also who sees them as being flâneurs or not.
It's not in a vacuum. It really still, you're in an environment of a city. And,
exactly.
And the cultural and the baggage, etc.
Yes, it's cultural. It's, for example, in New York, in the beginning of the 20th century, there were some parts in the cities where if you would walk as a woman, you would have been perceived as a prostitute, just because there were some areas where you would not walk alone.
Especially without a male companion,
exactly.
Or with groups or something like that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And my point is that the flâneuse always existed also in literature. Women were enjoying walking. It was not so permissive. And even now, I think now things have changed, but even now in some countries, you would get a lot of harassment as a solo traveler. And as a woman solo traveler, sure. or maybe also as a male in some parts of the world. And I was also curious about that, how that changed, how much freedom we have now as women in a city. Because I also had my fair share of harassment, for example, in Romania as a kid and as a teenager, and that changed in Berlin, and I felt some kind of freedom in Berlin because it's a huge city and I had more freedom as a woman, I think, and I wasn't harassed. And that also changed in Switzerland, because here people are also I find a lot of safety in Switzerland at night.
So you don't really feel that pressure of the city, not just
exactly.
like a gazing eyes, but then safety, etc.
Exactly.
Okay.
And also, as you said, there are not so many gazing eyes. I mean, here you can just blend into the crowd as
just
a flâneur.
Another person walking.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
And that gives us a lot of freedom also to discover and to have a connection with the city and to look at things in a different way. I mean, actually to slow down and, and by that I mean looking at the architecture, looking at the people, trying to ask yourself questions, finding places for thinking, because even walking in a city, can influence your thinking heavily, can have a huge impact on how you think and, the ideas that come into your mind just by walking.
Sure. But then again, I like how you're saying it is to slow down, because you could keep, walk around and walk around and walk around, but then never really like ground yourself and then take it in. Like what did you just experience? What did you just like see, etc. So maybe we talk a little bit about your dissertation. So the modern and postmodern Flâneuse in literature specifically. Was there a big difference of modern and postmodern, or and then I guess take us up till, you know, now. What is I mean, we'll get into your Flâneuse project, but like how has literature really like changed all of this? Because it seems like the expectations were maybe happening in different cities, but then like literature, storytelling, you know, maybe cemented a little bit of this. So I don't know, you tell me your dissertation, I guess.
Yeah, so I started, well, basically I had a comparison between the early 20th century with a Florentine experiment. Actually, it was late 19th century, early 20th century. A Florentine experiment is a short story written by Catherine Wilson. Mm-hmm. And she was an American expat living in Florence, and she described her wanderings in the city. Mm-hmm. And of course, that means that she was a woman of means, so she was wealthy. I had a comparison between, you know, how she wrote about walking, how much freedom she had as a woman in that time, versus Lauren Elkin's somehow autobiographical writing on the Flâneuse. And she's also American, and she lived, you know, all over Europe, and she's from, now I think she's based in Paris. I see. Okay. So I was looking at their writing and how they were engaging with Flânerie, how they would describe it and why this was so important for them. And most of the time it was an act of freedom, of being themselves in the city, and also of enjoying life and walking, purely that.
Right. And so what do you say, I guess, because like in the past it seems like there was more things like art, maybe food, entertainment, etc. But like you've said before, it doesn't have to be necessarily these big things. It could just be architecture, or as what a lot of people nowadays call people watching. You know, exactly. you can get a lot from just the watching the crowds and watching how people interact with each other. So maybe like what is I guess the I mean, you said modern and postmodern. What do we call today? The Flâneuse of today. I mean, that's maybe an end to your Flâneuse project.
Exactly.
So what, you know, let's go into the current times, if you will. What does it mean to be a Flâneuse now, or a Flâneur even, you know, in that way? Or is it even beneficial to then say Flâneur or Flâneuse, and then we just say we're, you know, participating in Flânerie?
That's a fascinating question, or actually set of questions. If we think about today, I think we do a lot of Flânerie, which is cyber, so it's CyberFlânerie.
That's a good point.
We are, you know, always online, and we are on Twitter, and we're, you know, strolling on these, you know, virtual streets in a way or another. So I think that's the Flâneur or Flâneuse of today, the CyberFlâneur. However, I see that people are still trying to reclaim the streets and find joy and fulfillment in just walking in a beautiful city. I think we all crave that, you know, having a beautiful aesthetical environment near us. And maybe the Flâneur or Flâneuse of, I don't know, 2010 was the solo traveler, because they would go on a lot of solo travels to discover themselves. And of course the novelty, the new cities, the food, the culture, everything was intoxicating in a good way.
Like a lot of travel bloggers, or
exactly.
Like you said, solo travel.
Yes.
I mean, I've seen definitely a liberating thing in guys and women as well, like both sides of women feeling like they're safe enough and to go to different cities solo, but then also men who are, you know, kind of fed up with corporatocracy and all this stuff to get away. So that's an interesting dichotomy, that, you know, the solo travel blogger was very popular for the last 10 years, but then now in 2021 that's probably changed a little bit. Or
with the pandemic, for sure.
With COVID it changes everything. Yeah,
because we had to be actually tourists in our own towns, and to find novelty in our own towns. Actually, I did that while I was still working last year in Lucerne, here in Switzerland. I would try to walk every day on a new, different street. And that's very difficult because, you know, here cities in Switzerland are very small and you don't have like these kind of large cities as in Berlin, for example, or London. Mm-hmm. But still, I could do that. I mean, trying to have a different itinerary, like a journey every day by walking. So yes, I think the pandemic shifted that perspective that we always have to go away to find ourselves. I think we can find ourselves even in our own cities. It's just about perspective, how we look upon things, how we try to find novelty in the known and in the unknown as well.
So maybe it's for some practical advice for people that maybe, you know, they have been stuck in their city and stuff. What is it? Simply taking an unknown route? Is it starting somewhere different? Is it maybe doing routes that you are familiar with backwards? Or is it maybe walking instead of biking, biking instead of car? You know, like what are some maybe practical pointers or something that, you know, people can do to just kind of maybe turn that switch a little bit?
I think everything you shared is a perfect example. Like just deciding to start your day with a different route to work, or trying to, I don't know, find a new cafe that gives you a nice vibe. Treating every day as an experiment. I think that's something that I'm very, very into, also in my writing and also how I live. I think it just gives me more excitement. And I think we can do that, you know, if we really have that goal.
So it's more of a mindset to start, and then how you do it is kind of...
It's very personal. It's very subjective, I think, because everybody has a different way of, you know, going through life. So I think my own, recommendation is to just do something in a different way every day. And if that is related to Flânerie, then just go also with your vibe, with your gut.
Like how you feel.
With your instinct.
Oh, okay, so instead of that path, it's the path less taken just because you feel like, oh, I might find something interesting, or just forcing yourself to do it. I do like how you said experimenting, because we're probably going to stroll around Zürich and experiment in a little short film recording later, but then I wanted to bring back to you on your website for the Flâneuse Project, experimenting. That was very interesting to me. But basically, I'll just read this quickly. The Flâneuse Project is the place where I follow my curiosity, share my writings and questions, curation of visual art, and maps for the places I stumble upon on my walks, and currently working on a digital magazine, a collection of slow interviews, and researching material for my upcoming online and offline exhibition. So maybe just give us a rundown of the Flâneuse Project. Seems very, because the first thing that kind of made me reach out to really get this going was those maps that you had shared of like all the walking that you had done in different places. So maybe just give a top line kind of overview of what the Flâneuse Project is for you.
I think it's a bit of everything, honestly, everything that I love. And I started with this project because I had this gut feeling to enter into a gallery. It was evening, I was in Berlin, and I just wanted to have a spontaneous interview with the gallery owner. I just felt like it, and she accepted. And she was also, well, she is also Romanian, which was a nice coincidence. So we had a nice conversation. And then I started it with realizing the fact that I love collecting interviews with people in writing. So I said, let's just start this blog. And after that, I started experimenting with poetry, with drawings, with different interviews about London, about Paris, you know, with my friends. With writing essays on the Flâneuse. So I think that's why I said experimenting, because, you know, tomorrow I might take it into a whole different direction and just, I don't know, record voice messages, and that's actually my post for the day, or I don't know, film a short video. I think the main idea is to just go with my gut feeling and to do what feels right in the moment, and then looking back to try to connect whatever I did and, you know, call it a project.
Love it. So it's yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we started with Eclectic Spacewalk was, not just essays, but then we wanted to talk to people, but then it's gotten into like short films, but then now we're also looking at other, experimental things, because then the video, it turned into, well, we could do 360 video and some drones. And so I do like that it's kind of an intellectual project for you that brings in a lot of like curiosity, if you will, and you're allowing that to happen. So what was kind of the main, I guess, driver? You mentioned the interview that kind of came off the cuff, but like when did you kind of know? Was it after your dissertation or when you created your website? When did you know that like this is what you wanted to do?
I think after my first interview, because I realized that I love creating archives online, and I didn't want to have only a collection of essays. I wanted to have a collection of everything, and try to connect the dots after they're made, after they're created, as I said before.
Sure.
I'm fascinated by archives also because of Walter Benjamin, the Archives Project, where he experimented with different ways of collecting thoughts from writers, from philosophers, from scientists, and put them all in a book, and then making notes on them. So I always had a fascination for archives, and I treat this website as an online archive of my own. Sometimes I'm just uploading some kind of old essays I wrote in a PDF format. I think I'm just playing around, honestly, with this, and I'm having fun. So.
Well, then that's the best thing and that's I guess the driving factor is that if you're having fun, then keep going. So then I guess next it'd be easiest for the audience to stay up with. You want to do an upcoming book, a field guide to Flânerie. So I mean, I don't know how much you can talk about it or want to talk about it, but I thought that this would be a good opportunity to kind of talk about it. And so would this be more of a practical, like how to, because we kind of touched on a little bit of that. It's very kind of subjective, but there may be some guidelines. Or is it going to be more back to your dissertation with historical stuff, or again, like your Flâneuse Project of intellectual curiosity, bringing it all together? So maybe just talk a little bit about that.
I think I will bring everything together. Yeah. So it will be a collection of essays, academic essays, but also interviews, photographs, illustrations, drawings, maps, curated, because I also love curation a lot. And I will just assemble them together, and I want to create an experience with the book. And by that I mean also, a visual experience, and choosing the right image and text, and having fun with everything I created in the past 2 or 3 years on my blog. So this will be also an experiment. But I think it's something that I always wanted to do. I don't know if this will be a how-to, because as I said, everybody's very different in how they want to experience the city. But maybe I will focus, for example, on perception, and why perception is very important in walking and how we experience the city, or on CyberFlânerie, or on the way we interact with the city itself. So I think that might be a how-to, only to pinpoint those, themes that are important for me.
Right, to get it started a little bit.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah. But then it's going to be up to the reader to really take it and run with it for their way.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And make something out of it on their own walks.
Right, experiment themselves.
Exactly.
And then, so is there a timeline of this? Is this year, next year?
It should have been this December, but I postponed it for March.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Well, one thing I would say to you is try to definitely make it some type of digital as well, because even though I love the touch of books and a physical thing, I think that accessibility would be amazing with your, photos and pictures and things like that. You could kind of have maybe an online scrap, kind of way to make it cool. So don't take anything, but I think that would be cool to really institute in the digital form as well, somehow. Because I know you've been doing that with your online and Twitter and etc. But I think to have it in maybe one compilation, like you said, a curated thing online would be great. So let's maybe talk about curation in general. Like what drew you to curation? Like why do you like it so much? Like what kind of gets you going about curation? Is it just like assembling disparate things for different people, or do you see yourself like as someone that can connect things, or is it just more like that just is what gets you going, and then that it just happens to be curation?
I love visual storytelling a lot, and I think for that curation is very important. You know, I love museums and galleries and looking at art, and I was always fascinated when I would experience, you know, a gallery. About how the curator decided, I don't know, to hang that on the wall that way in that small room with that, I don't know, color of the wall. For me, everything was an aesthetic experience, how I would perceive art in different contexts, in different rooms. For example, I was here in Zürich at a museum, and it was an exhibition about René Girard's concept of scapegoating. And I was absolutely blown away by the experience itself in the gallery, by how the curator chose the objects to, you know, to show scapegoating from the medieval ages until, you know, modern times. And it was a very, very touching experience. Of course, but you know, as somebody that loves curation, I was also analyzing it. So I was looking at how they display things on the wall, on how narrow the rooms were made, on their, I don't know, choice of the soundtrack, because I would also listen to music, and how music influenced my feelings. All I know is that I left that gallery in tears.
Oh wow!
So
very moving.
Exactly.
Like the entire experience. Oh wow.
Yeah,
okay.
And I think that also influenced my desire to be a curator, because it's also about being able to put together different topics and offer an experience to an audience.
So experience. It seems like experience design is almost like your second. I mean,
exactly.
Curation is great, but experience design, like maybe that's another thing. The only reason why I bring that up is specifically in my grad school, we have an immersion project that is about this thing called Picturing the Invisible, and it's about it's right now at the London Royal Sciences exhibition or something, but it's coming to Tomb in Munich in March or June or something like that. So maybe we'll have to get you there. But basically, it's about the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant disaster in Japan, and it's bringing together pictures, photographs, essays, etc. So I'll be able to like do some of the stuff. So I might have to rely on, you know, your experience with this. But that's one of the things that we're kind of putting in the moment right now is that exact thing. Like, where do you put them? What do you have a video in the beginning to frame things?
Exactly.
Do you have music? But it seems like it's a very powerful medium to do regardless. And if you do it you have a lot of leeway though of, I don't want to say pulling at heartstrings, but for an experiencer, for someone that's going in there, the person who makes it and designs it has an immense amount of power and responsibility to kind of like show you or push you into emotional states and understanding and curiosities. So it's very interesting that like that's going to be something that, you know, similar, I guess you could say, in the future. So I guess maybe can you talk a little, we'll get into Interintellect and hosting and stuff like that, but do you want to talk a little bit about your entrepreneurship series as well? Because it seems like curation's one side, but then entrepreneurship is also a little bit of
different side.
Yeah, different side, but it's in two sides of the same coin, maybe. You know?
This is something personal, because next year I want to start a business, and I said, why not actually have a group, you know, a group that I can share my experiences with, and also that group maybe also they would like to embark on an entrepreneurship kind of journey next year. And that's why I wanted to start that. So it will be more like an accountability group to show up every month and to share our business experiences so far. For me, it's going to be very interesting, and because I never done that. I have a lot of projects on my mind, and I will experiment with them, but that's it. I don't have like a clear business goal for now.
Right.
And I think having a group to share that with just makes things more exciting. And you're also not alone. I mean, you can get support, and
100%,
it's building a small community within a community.
Right. Yeah, the networking effects of things can really help in a lot of different ways. Okay. So I guess let's move on to being an Interintellect host. So, hey Anna, we love you. Thanks so much for basically starting such an interesting medium of talking, etc. Like you said before the Flâneurs, salons were such a big part of the late 19th century, early 20th century, before the World War I. So I guess maybe just talk about your experience and how you got involved. Like what did you just find Interintellect, and then maybe give a brief overview of Interintellect, maybe, because you've done many salons, and then we can kind of go into specific salons after.
Yeah, everything started 2 years ago as I was leaving Berlin and moving to Switzerland, and I knew about Anna from Twitter, and I knew that she was hosting salons at her place in London, and for me that was fascinating. The idea to just open your house, to complete strangers, to have a beautiful conversation.
Yeah.
I was very, very inspired by that. And then COVID, came, and she had to move everything online. And this is, I think, how, there was this boom of virtual salons. So a salon is a 3 hours moderated conversation online most of the time, but now they're also gathering offline all over the world. And at first, I was very shy to host, honestly, especially online, because I never done that. And to moderate, a deep conversation for 3 hours on Zoom can be quite difficult and maybe also exhausting. So I was a bit reluctant to host online in the beginning, because I wanted, this kind of experience to be in somebody's home. Of course, with COVID, I couldn't have that experience in a new country. And then I started hosting my first salon. Actually, it was on the topic of Flânerie, so walking.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know that people were so interested in that, because I really expected just a few people, coming and talking about the Flâneur, but I think around 20 people arrived, and we had a 3 hours conversation about how walking changed our lives. So that was something.
So a great proof of concept.
Exactly.
A big stamp of approval in your book. Okay.
Yeah. And after that, I had a salon on talking with strangers.
Okay.
That was also very interesting. 40 people in a Zoom room talking with strangers. So it was very meta, in many ways.
Sure.
And from that on, I just had a lot of fun hosting. I think I hosted around 20 salons so far.
Oh, wow.
In 1 year.
Oh wow! So okay, yeah.
And everything was online. And for me, it was a big shift in mindset, because I was very shy online. I could barely say a word in a salon where I was the participant. And from that, I had to be the host, moderating a 3 hours conversation. So it was very, it was challenging, but so rewarding in so many ways.
Experimenting and stepping out of your comfort zone. It seems like this has only been a good thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, we've been wanting to host a salon for a little bit, but then again, like you said, reluctance of, well, what do we talk about? Are people going to be interested? And all these kind of I don't know, I want to say insecurities, but just hesitancies. And then now I think we've kind of got to the point where I'm going to try to host a salon about technology and not techno-optimism or pessimism, but realism, and then use the metaverse, as kind of a jumping off point, because it's very fruitful, now with everything that's happening online, offline. We actually kind of half hosted a get together in Los Angeles before we left of Interintellect, people in real life, and went to a bar, brewery, and just again talked with strangers for a couple hours, and it was a great experience. So, but then even more so is that we're going to maybe try to do a series of my ebook our ebook is called Tripping Over the Truth. So tripping over your own biases about what you think, etc., and then all the writing that I've done, and maybe putting it into 3 mini-series, a little themes and stuff. So very excited about all of that stuff. But
I can hear from your voice.
Yeah, right. But at the same time, it's been months in the making. I maybe wanted to. I think I've first entry into like salon that we went to was maybe in the summer, I believe, you know, and then became a member. And because, I mean, it was economics or technology, and there's just such a diverse amount of things that you can get involved in. Visa, on Twitter, VisaCon, you know, been to a couple of his about friends and things like that. So, like you said, range is of curiosity is almost unbounded. But I guess what I wanted to ask you about is maybe for someone like me or others that are maybe a little hesitant, like what are some of the things that, is it just going to more salons? Is it kind of just trying to get out of your comfort zone? Or what kind of, I mean, now it seems like you were hesitant, but then you've done 20 salons. Like that's quite a jump, you know? So like what can maybe we take away from your experience from that, and then maybe, you know, up our own, if you will.
I think starting is the most important thing. So just hosting your first salons, and after that, I think the dominoes will start falling, because it's, especially if you crave deep connections and if you love hosting and moderating a conversation and you get fulfillment out of that, it's really addicting. I mean, I am a shy person, and for me to host twice a month, you know, with total strangers, you know, not in my mother tongue, it was a bit challenging, but at the same time, it also so rewarding. I made so many friends, and they're not only connections, you know, it's not only networking. It's, I think, more than that. In many ways, I think that's what I love about this community, that you see them after that kind of deep, intimate conversation, you see them as friends.
Right, you kind of almost go past all the pleasantries.
Exactly. So we don't talk about the weather, we don't talk about what we ate.
Water cooler talk.
Exactly, yeah. We just dive in philosophy, or I don't know, we talk about Nietzsche after 2 minutes, and then we talk about our personal lives. And I think my salons are a bit different than science salons, because we always go very deep into personal things. So it's more like storytelling. And I think that's why I could build such a deep bond with people, because they were very intimate. I mean, these salons and also the conversations.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that at a science salon you can also not have those human moments inside a conversation. It's just that you have maybe a bit more knowledge and insight than in just, you know, I don't know, an intimate story about, I don't know, a trauma you had, for example, would be different than, you know, sharing things.
Do you have a favorite salon that you've hosted?
I think all of them are very, very dear to my heart, but one in particular was hosted in January on Enjoying the Unknown.
Ah, okay.
And I think it's the salon I had the best feedback from the participants, because they reached out after and they told me that they really enjoyed it and they felt very good and safe, and you know, safe to share their stories on the unknown. And I will actually host another salon on this topic in, I think, a couple of days.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So, I don't know if people will see this before that, but okay.
I don't think so, because it's going to be on Wednesday already.
Oh, okay, yeah, probably not. That's interesting. So what is it? So about the unknown again?
Exactly. So I started in January with the unknown. I had a full year of unknown.
Okay.
And now I'm closing it with more unknown. So yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. And then so let's talk a little bit, because you've also started writing a little bit too for the Interintellect. So I want to take one of these. You just did a recent write-up within the last couple of days on the art of conversation. So this podcast is called Conversations, so it fits well, and hopefully we're doing what you kind of wrote in this. But I really loved this Horace quote. So I'll say it, so bear with me, audience. The aim of the poet is to inform or delight, or to combine together, in what he says, both pleasure and applicability to life. In instructing, be brief in what you say, in order that your readers may grasp it quickly and retain it faithfully. Superfluous words simply spill out when the mind is already full. Fiction invented in order to please should remain close to reality. Horace, Ars Poetica. So can you talk about the art of conversation, and then maybe a little bit about that quote about, you know, not getting too far from reality, not too much fiction, because it seems like good fiction or good things like tug at our reality or our heartstrings, etc. It's never too far away. So maybe just go into that.
Actually, this quote by Horace is what made me want to write this essay. Because I always thought about poetry and conversations as being not necessarily equal, but quite similar. Because in a good conversation, you are, in a way, entertained, but you also get knowledge. You also receive a lot of knowledge. Sure. So that's how I wanted to start my essay. And I also wanted to focus on intimacy, on building human moments. I think this is very important in any kind of topic, because we might say that, if we talk about technology or science, we need to be clear and precise. But I think even in those kind of conversations or, lectures, we can build human moments and have like a intimate relationship somehow with the audience and vice versa.
Even in the most abstract,
exactly.
You can still come together. Okay, interesting. And then so you mentioned intimacy and immediacy, but then also you mentioned two other things on thinking together, and then one of my favorite kind of intellectual heroes, if you will, if not influences, is Marshall McLuhan and Margaret. So the medium is the message. So maybe talk a little bit about the medium is the message and on thinking together. How does that play into like the intimacy and immediacy into the art of conversation?
Yeah, in terms of thinking together, I think we get a lot of abundance and richness when we connect ideas together and when we have conversations. For example, this is something that I had in my past year attending Interintellect salons and also hosting Interintellect salons, and I realized how much that shifted my thinking and also opened up my mind and also my eyes in many ways. And as for the medium is the message, here I was thinking more or less about the rituals, because in having a good conversation and also a good salon offline, you need to take care of small rituals, as in welcoming the guest, having intro rounds, offering them cookies and coffee, wine or tea, and being this kind of host in your own home. And I think that can be also translated virtually, so you can have that even in a Zoom room if you're welcoming and if you also abide to some rituals of welcoming, of having intros. So actually having a script, but only as a backbone for the conversation, and after that letting everything flow.
Right.
And also be prepared for a lot of unknown, especially virtually, because
yeah.
things can happen, like.
No, that's interesting you say that, because that's one of the things that I've tried to pride myself on, especially is like, I think people in the biz call it rapport. It's like building rapport. I mean, we just met each other an hour ago personally for the first time, but we've had conversations over the last weeks. I think it was even a month or two originally on Twitter. So that's one of the things I've tried to get in. And the times that I've at least felt the rapport is there and the guest feel rapport, the conversation is very open. It's very intuitive, very intelligent and stuff. And so it seems like that's one of the basic things of our humanity. It's like, let me meet you where you are, and then we're going to talk, etc. So that's interesting that you say that that's such a important part, even virtually, because I mean in COVID times sometimes you just get on Zoom and you click accept or something, and then that's the end of it. But then you still need to build the rapport even online.
And it's very easy to be distracted, having 10 tabs open
as everyone does
while somebody is sharing their intimate life story.
right. It's a very good point. Wow, that's awesome. Okay, and then so let's go into two more things. We'll wrap up here in about 10 minutes. But you mentioned briefly what we were talking about before about time travel, writing a sci-fi novella. You said you've been writing it for a couple years. So like, talk us about that, like travel to Edinburgh, because that's a little different than the art of conversation or some of these academic write-ups or essays. So how does that just kind of plug into a different curiosity or creativity for you? And then maybe also you mentioned that music specifically helps a lot in the process of world building and character development. So maybe tie that in as well.
Yeah, I stumbled upon this idea of writing a book on time travel when I was visiting Edinburgh for the first time. And I was staying at this beautiful Airbnb on a street that resembles a street like in the Harry Potter world.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that inspired me a lot. And I was always quite a melancholic human being because I was thinking about the past a lot and also about the future and about time, the nature of time. Actually, one of my favorite books is Carlo Rovelli's The Order of Time. I love that book.
And it's very small too, comparatively, because it's very punchy.
It's scientific, but also he also writes about poetry and about philosophy. So he's a scientist, but
very Italian.
Exactly. And I love that. So this idea just popped into my mind, and why travel to Edinburgh? Because I was in Edinburgh. Why travel? Because somehow I was trying to play with time travel, and to have only travel in the title, and then to discover while you're reading the book that it's actually about time traveling and not only travel as in going somewhere like a journey. And then my grandmother died, so somehow this was switched also into time travel and grief, and how we cope with grief, and how we would experience time travel, or the existence actually of time travel, in relation to grief and seeing somebody that's that died and going back into time and seeing them again
when they're alive.
Exactly. 20 years ago. And I think that's when I actually stopped writing, because it was very complex to see what I can make out of the grief and how I can connect it beautifully with time travel. But the characters are still there. Everything that I built, the world that I built is still there. For me, it was also an experiment because I love reading scientific papers on time travel. So it was just like also a way for me to research time travel and to just print all the papers I could get, put them, in a book with some photos and my writing and drafts. It felt like, again, building an archive and trying to make something out of it. I haven't finished the novella, but I'm planning on doing that in the next years. I don't have a time limit on this. I just want to play with it.
So the Field Guide Flânerie by March, and then we'll see what happens with the time.
Exactly.
That's interesting you said travel to Edinburgh, because not too much of an aside, but the second podcast that we had was Professor Michael Trolby, and he's a philosophy professor, and he just moved after we did our interview last year through COVID to the University of Edinburgh, and he actually is specifically on grief, and he just wrote a book. So maybe you should check his book out, about grief and stuff. Then maybe that might have some through lines of some of that. But I guess I don't want to bring up the prototypical like Hitler baby and all that, it's a time travel. But let's ask you, what do you think about the grandfather paradox? And the grandfather paradox is, if you go back in time and then kill your grandfather, do you exist, etc.? Like, do you have I don't know. We just have a fun kind of experiment. Do you what are your thoughts on that? Because you said you've read a lot of like scientific papers about specifically the possibility of time travel, but that's always like a very interesting example that people use.
I think if that happens, we're just building different multiple worlds. When you go back and you kill him, or when you go back and you don't kill him and you still exist. So basically I think that would just create multiple worlds.
So it's more
when things happen. Exactly.
Splits of paths, if you will.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that would create, endless possibilities. And it's also a very interesting way of looking at life, because we have one journey and we make some choices, but we cannot make all the choices. But, if different worlds would exist with different us, then basically we're living all the possibilities, all the choices at the same time.
Right. And then that goes into like how the quantum wave function collapses and how we experience time and reality, etc., like scientifically at least. And I think that's the what is it called? The hypothesis of multi-worlds or multiverse hypothesis, that's basically what it is. Okay.
Yeah, the multiverse.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I guess before the second to last question, what are you most excited about in the coming years? Maybe this year and 5 years, obviously, other than your novel, or I mean your field guide, Interintellect Salons. Like, what is pulling? I know you might be moving to Romania back again, so like I don't know exactly how much you want to share, but like what is getting you the most excited about the next year and the next 5 years?
I think I'm excited right now about everything, honestly. So
that's a good point. That's good.
But I'm excited mostly about the project that I will have in Romania, and one of them is actually building a cabin in the woods in the Carpathians.
Okay.
That's a 5-year project.
Okay.
And inviting people over to have conversations, for 10 days, and do that every year.
Oh, wow.
With the sole purpose of just inviting interesting people that I know, putting them together, for 10 days, having different activities, workshops, conversations, salons, and just for the, pure pleasure of serendipity, of
see what happens.
Exactly. Of seeing what happens if we live there for 10 days together in the Carpathians, in the Romanian Carpathians, and we think about life and ideas, and we write together. And of course, everything would be a bit like intellectually focused. But it's something that I always wanted to explore. And why the Romanian Carpathians? Because they are beautiful, and there is this abundance of wildlife there, and of beautiful scenery. And people don't know a lot about Romania. I mean, mostly they know about Dracula Castle,
right?
Which is very close to where I will live, like 20 kilometers away. By the way, if you're ever coming to Brașov next year,
we're going there. Let's go. We have to see this.
Yeah. So if you're visiting in spring, then I know where to bring you.
Yeah, exactly. But then again, like the Romanian Carpathians, even just in the mountains, like that'll be. It sounds like almost like an intellectual adult sleepaway camp. 10 days. Like that's
just
I'd be
to
interested.
Play and experiment and have workshops and to have conversations as we're having right now, but with 15 more people.
Right. more. Okay, so that was great. So last question, and I ask all my guests this. It's basically deals with the overview effect. It's basically what started this entire kind of intellectual thing for us, Eclectic Spacewalk. And for those that don't know, the overview effect is when an astronaut gets up above, the atmosphere into outer space and looks back down on the Earth. And it's basically been, I think every single astronaut, they've said, I think there's been 560 humans that have gone up, so out of 10 billion people that have ever existed, humans, that have been experienced this, and they've had a visceral, emotional change. Like they've seen how, the Earth is just sitting there in a void, and how precious it is, and how precious life is, and they want to, kind of hold on to that and protect it. So I always ask, like, if you had, the opportunity to, get in one of these rockets or go to the moon or whatever, and you're looking down, is there some type of message that you would like to say, or some type of thing that you would like to convey? And then, I'll just let you kind of end this.
I was actually having goosebumps as you were describing
Fantastic.
this because I was really imagining myself being there.
Right.
I think I would have definitely a life-changing experience in many ways, and I don't know if I would say honestly something because I would be speechless for the most of the time, like for 10 minutes at least. And after that I would just be in awe of how beautiful the world is, and also how unique and precious and rare, and how lucky we are that we're alive.
Well said. Cool. Well, that wraps us up. Thanks for coming on Conversations, Patricia. Really
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And until next time, ad astra.